She fell from the sky, and he found her in the wreckage. The sky cracked open with a roar. Luke was fixing the fence behind his farmhouse when he saw it, a ball of fire tearing through the clouds. It moved fast, burning bright, and then vanished behind the trees on the far hill. Seconds later, the ground shook. Boom! Dust rose in the distance. Something had crashed. Most people would run the other way, but not Luke. He grabbed his flashlight and jumped into his truck. It took him 20 minutes to reach the crash site. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. Even the birds were gone. When he stepped out of the truck, he smelled smoke and something else, metal and heat, but not like any engine he knew. He followed the trail of broken trees and burning leaves until he found it. His breath caught in his throat. It wasn't a plane. The thing was shaped like a teardrop, sleek, black, and glowing blue from the cracks. Steam hissed from its sides. Sparks popped from a damaged panel. It looked alive. Cautiously, Luke stepped closer. That's when he heard it. A soft sound. Not mechanical. Not animal. A voice. He ran around the side of the ship and froze. There she was, a girl, lying in the dirt, half covered in ash and mud. She was breathing, barely. Her skin wasn't normal. It shimmered under the moonlight, like metal and silk mixed together. Her hair was silver, tangled, with dark streaks running through it. Her eyes blinked open slowly. And they weren't human. They were glowing blue. Luke dropped to his knees beside her. Hey, can you hear me? She didn't speak, just looked at him, like she was trying to remember what words were. He touched her arm gently. She flinched, but didn't pull away. He could feel heat through her skin, not like fever, more like static. She was injured, but something in her body was keeping her alive. I need to get you out of here, Luke whispered. He looked at the ship, still hissing, still sparking. It could explode. He didn't think. He just acted. He scooped her into his arms. She was lighter than she looked, and carried her back through the woods. She didn't speak the whole way, but her eyes never left his face. Back at the farmhouse, he laid her on the couch, wrapped her in a blanket. Her body glowed faintly under the fabric, like soft light from underwater. He grabbed the first aid kit, unsure what to do. Her wounds weren't like human wounds. The blood, if that's what it was, shimmered like melted silver. He sat back, staring. Who? No. What was she? An hour passed. She didn't sleep, just watched him. Her eyes calm, curious. At one point, she whispered something, a word he didn't understand. Kavela. He frowned. Is that your name? She blinked slowly, then pointed to herself. Kavela. He nodded. Okay, Kavela. He pointed to himself. Luke. She stared for a second, then nodded back. Lukey. He smiled. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The night was silent again. Her ship still burned, far away in the trees. But inside the farmhouse, something strange was happening. The air around her shimmered softly. The lights flickered, even though the power was fine. His phone screen turned off by itself. And Kavela just lay there, eyes glowing, watching the ceiling. Like she could see something no one else could. Luke didn't sleep that night. He sat in the chair beside her and kept asking himself the same question. Why did she crash here? And why does it feel like this is only the beginning? Outside, in the forest, something blinked in the dark. A small metal drone. Watching. Recording. And flying away. Someone knew she had survived. And they were coming. She said nothing, but her eyes never left him. Kavela didn't speak much, but her eyes, they never stopped watching him. Luke tried not to stare back, but it was hard. Her eyes glowed like soft glass, not bright, but deep, like light trapped underwater. They made the air feel still when she looked at him too long. She sat quietly on the couch, wrapped in the blanket he gave her. Still, calm, and alert. Every sound in the house made her flinch at first. The fridge hum, the pipes creaking, the old floorboards. But she didn't run. She just watched. Luke cooked eggs and toast that morning. He placed a plate in front of her, unsure if she'd eat it. She looked down at the food, tilted her head, then slowly picked up the toast. She sniffed it first, touched it to her lips, and then took the smallest bite. Her eyes widened. She didn't say anything, but she ate the rest of it. Slowly, carefully. Luke smiled. "I'll take that as a yes." Still no words, but her gaze followed him as he moved around the kitchen. She studied his hands, his tools on the wall, the pictures on his fridge, everything. At one point, she pointed to a photo. It was Luke and his brother, younger, smiling, standing beside an old red truck. Luke walked over. "That's Ryan, my brother. He left Earth a few years ago, part of a Mars colony crew." Kavela tilted her head again, then softly said, "Mars, cold." Luke blinked. "You've been to Mars?" She didn't answer, just looked away. That was the first clue. The second came later. Luke stepped outside to check on the crashed ship. He took a toolbox and headed up the hill. Kavela followed him, silent, barefoot. She walked like someone used to different gravity. Light steps, too smooth, almost floating. When they reached the wreck, Luke whistled. The ship still steamed. The body was cracked open, but the shape was mostly whole. He knelt beside it and started examining the damage. Kavela didn't help, but she crouched beside him, watching. Her hands hovered over the metal, and the broken panel pulsed with light, just once. Luke sat back. "What did you do?" She looked at him. "Speak." He raised an eyebrow. "The ship." She nodded. "It speaks to me." He pointed to a burned-out part. "Can you fix this?" She shook her head. "Need, source, fuel, gone." Luke scratched his head. "Alien fuel, huh? Not something I've got in the shed." She said nothing, but her eyes lingered on his face, like she was trying to figure something out. Back at the house, Luke noticed something strange. His tools had been moved. Small things, nuts, wires, chips, rearranged on the workbench in perfect patterns. Not random, not human. He turned to Kavela. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching. "You touched my tools?" he asked, not angry. She didn't answer, but she looked at the table, then at him, then whispered, "Trying to help." Luke smiled. "Then you can stay as long as you want." She looked surprised, really surprised, like no one had ever said that to her before. She looked down, then whispered, "Most turn away." Luke leaned forward. "Not me." That night, they sat by the fireplace. She sat close, closer than before. Still no words, but her shoulder touched his. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. He glanced at her and asked softly, "Why were you flying over Earth? Why here?" She looked into the fire. Her glow dimmed. Her answer came as a whisper, "Running." Luke didn't ask more. He didn't need to. Not yet. Because sometimes silence tells a better story than words ever could. Outside, on the edge of the forest, a second drone hovered quietly. Its red lens blinked once, then vanished into the night. Something out there had found her again, and it was only a matter of time before silence turned into something louder, something dangerous. The ship was almost fixed, but she didn't want to leave. Luke wiped sweat from his forehead. He stood back and looked at the alien ship, now mostly upright in the field behind his house. 3 days. That's how long it took to bring the power core back online, clean the broken panels, and figure out how to wire his old solar units into the ship's strange energy grid. Kavila had helped, but only a little. Mostly, she just stood nearby, hands behind her back, watching. He didn't mind. Her presence had become part of his day now. Quiet, strange, peaceful. She didn't talk much, but she didn't need to. He'd gotten used to her silence. The way she moved without sound. The way her glow brightened when he smiled. The ship pulsed softly now, alive again. Luke stepped into the open hatch, checking the last line of energy cells. It was almost done. Back at the house, Kavila stood at the window, watching him. Her fingers pressed gently against the glass. She didn't look happy. That night, Luke found her sitting by the fireplace. She had drawn strange patterns on the table using grains of rice. Circles, stars, paths. When he stepped closer, she erased it with a swipe of her hand. "What was that?" he asked. She looked up slowly. "Map. Of what?" "Choices." Luke sat down across from her. "Your ship's ready. You can leave now." She didn't answer. Then finally, she whispered, "I know." He watched her for a long moment, then asked, "So why haven't you?" She looked away. "Because leaving feels like breaking." Luke didn't speak. He wasn't sure what to say. Was she scared of whoever was chasing her? Or was it something else? That night, while she slept, he checked the signal tracker on the ship. A small red light blinked in the corner. It hadn't blinked before. He tapped the screen. The ship responded with a low hum. A message displayed in strange symbols. He didn't understand the language, but he recognized the shape. A triangle with a circle in the center. It pulsed red, then turned green, then vanished. He went back inside. Kavila was sitting up now, waiting. "You found it," she said. Luke blinked. "You knew." She nodded slowly. "Tracker. From enemy. Hidden. Always finds me." Luke stared at her. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked down. "If I speak it, it becomes real. If I leave, you will not be safe." He stepped closer, sat beside her. "You think you're protecting me." She nodded. "But what if I want to protect you?" Kavila blinked. Her glow pulsed, faint but warm. "I don't understand you." Luke smiled. "That makes two of us." They both laughed, softly. It was the first time she laughed with sound, not just with her eyes. Then she said something new. "Where I come from, we don't bond. We serve, obey, escape. You helped me with no demand. And now, I don't know how to leave." Luke didn't answer. He simply reached out his hand. She looked at it for a long time, then placed hers in his. Their lights met, his skin, hers. No shock, just warmth, just choice. Outside, in the woods, the drone returned. This time, it stayed longer, watching, listening. Its red lens turned green. A message sent. Target located. Preparing ground extraction. Kavila stood quickly, eyes wide. "They are close." Luke grabbed his boots. "Then we run." She shook her head. "We can't. They know your energy now. You helped fix my ship. You're linked." Luke looked at her. "Then you're not leaving alone." She stared at him, tears glowing in her eyes. "You'd leave your world for me." He smiled. "If it means you stay safe, yeah." Suddenly, the ship outside roared to life. Not from them. From something else. Something external. Something trying to take control. Kavila gasped. "They're trying to steal the ship, remotely." Luke ran out the door. "Then we better take it first." And just like that, two lives became one decision. Together or lost. There was no in between. She saved his life. And now she thinks he belongs to her. The ship lit up like a sunrise. Blinding white streaks pulsed through the sky. Luke ran toward it, but Kovela grabbed his arm and pulled him back behind the trees. Not safe. They're watching. He nodded, breathing hard. Suddenly, 3 small drones zipped past the treetops, silent and fast, like silver ghosts. One stopped, turned, spotted them. A high-pitched sound hit Luke's ears, sharp, painful. He dropped to his knees, grabbing his head. Blood dripped from his nose. The drone aimed something at him. But before it could fire, Kovela stepped in front of him. Her entire body lit up, like she became part of the light itself. She raised her hand. The drone froze in midair, spinning, crackling. Then, boom! It exploded in a wave of sound and static. The other 2 drones flew off fast, leaving smoke trails behind. Kovela turned and dropped to her knees beside Luke. His vision blurred. She placed her glowing hand on his forehead. A warm wave moved through him. His headache vanished. His breath calmed. He blinked, slowly returning to focus. "What did you do?" Kovela didn't speak. She just held his face in both hands, looking at him like he was something sacred. Then softly, she said, "You are mine now." Luke froze. "What do you mean?" She didn't blink. "You saved me. I saved you. I've chosen. In my world, that means bond." Luke pulled back a little. "Bond. Like relationship." She tilted her head. "Closer. Permanent. Life deep." He blinked. "Wait, are you saying I'm your partner?" Kovela nodded once. No hesitation. "Yes, you belong. To me." Luke looked stunned. "I mean, we barely know each other. Where I come from, people take time. They date." Kovela stared at him blankly. "What is date?" He rubbed the back of his neck. It's like food. Talking. Learning things. Laughing." She leaned in closer. "We already did that." Luke didn't know what to say. Because technically, she wasn't wrong. She stood suddenly, turning toward the ship. "They'll come again. Vigor force. We must leave." "But where?" Luke asked. "Far. My ship is ready. We fly soon." Luke took a deep breath. "And what if I stay?" She turned sharply. Her voice went quiet, but serious. "They will come back. And they will take you, because of me. I will not allow that." He looked into her glowing eyes. "So you want me to come with you?" Kovela stepped closer, took his hand again. This time, her fingers wrapped tight. Not just touching, claiming. "I don't want. I need. You are my light bond now." Luke exhaled slowly. He should have been scared, but he wasn't. Somehow, it felt right. Back at the house, Reese appeared, out of breath, carrying a bag. "You two need to go. Now." Luke looked confused. "How did you?" "Drones triggered my old alert net," she said. "I figured it was you." She turned to Kovela. "They'll send hunters next. Not machines. Real ones." Kovela's face changed. Her glow dimmed. "Hunters. Our death." Reese nodded. "Then you better take your boy and get off this planet." Kovela didn't correct her. She just held Luke's hand tighter. That night, the stars burned brighter than usual. The ship was silent, waiting. The hatch opened. Luke stood at the edge of everything he knew, looking up at a future that made no sense, but felt right. Kovela stood beside him, eyes glowing, heart open. "And for the first time," he said, "Okay, I'll go with you." She smiled. "Then we are one now." Behind them, the farmhouse lights blinked once, then went dark. The earth stayed behind. The stars opened wide. And 2 lives, once strangers, became something the universe couldn't predict. He tried to let her go, but she refused to say goodbye. The stars outside the ship looked different from Earth. Colder, quieter, Luke sat by the viewing window, staring at the galaxies he never dreamed he'd actually see. Behind him, the ship hummed softly. It felt alive. Because it was. Kavela had been silent since they left the atmosphere. Not angry. Not distant. Just thinking. Maybe she could sense what he was about to say. Luke stood up, walked toward her in the glowing control chamber. She sat in the pilot's seat, her hands resting on a surface that reacted to her skin, rising and shifting with pulses of light. He stopped a few steps behind her. Kavela. She didn't turn. Yes, Luke. He took a deep breath. I'm not sure I belong out here. She turned slowly. Her eyes dimmed. You said yes. You came. You chose. He nodded. I did. But I didn't know what this would feel like. This isn't just far from Earth. It's far from everything I know. Kavela stood up. She didn't look angry. Just hurt. You want to go back. Luke lowered his eyes. I think. I need to. She stepped closer. Not quickly. Not forcefully. Just enough for her voice to be heard softer. Then I failed. My people don't just leave. We only stay with those who complete the bond. Luke looked up. Maybe that's the problem. I didn't know I was completing anything. Where I'm from, love takes time. She stared at him for a long moment. Then whispered, and where I'm from, no one gives it. But you did. She turned to the panel, pressed her hand down. The ship's walls changed, opening a new window. It showed Earth, now just a small glowing dot behind them. I can take you back, she said quietly. But it will break the link. It will tear something inside us. Luke stepped forward. Are you saying I'm trapped? She shook her head. No, I'm saying I'm not leaving you behind. Silence filled the room. Then Kavela said something he hadn't expected. You're not just human to me, Luke. You're home. He felt something move in his chest. Not fear. Not regret. Something new. Like being seen for the first time. But still, doubt crept in. If I stay with you, will I still be me? She reached out, placed her hand over his chest. More than ever. You'll be ours. He looked at her. What if we're too different? What if this doesn't make sense? Kavela leaned closer. Their foreheads almost touched. Her glow flickered gently against his skin. Then we'd make new sense. Suddenly, an alarm beeped. She turned fast, tapping the control panel. A message appeared in her language, then translated. Signal detected. Earth-based military attempting long-range ping. Luke stared. They know I'm gone. Kavela's eyes narrowed. They're looking for you. They want to bring you back. He nodded slowly. Because they don't know where I went. And maybe they're scared. Kavela turned to him again. Do you want me to respond? He paused, then smiled faintly. No. Let them wonder. She smiled too. Small. Real. Then said, You try to leave. But I already said goodbye to that part of you. The part that was afraid. And with those words, Luke knew he wasn't going anywhere. Because sometimes, the place you belong isn't made of land or air. It's made of someone who doesn't let you go. The enemy arrived, and she stood between them and him. The ship jerked. Lights turned red. Sirens echoed through the hallway like a heartbeat speeding up. Kavela's voice went sharp. They found us. Luke ran into the control room. The star window now showed something terrifying. A ship, dark, silent, shaped like a blade, hovering in space just a few kilometers away. No lights. No signal. Just danger. Kavela's hands moved fast across the panel. Symbols shifted. Weapons activated. Shields powered on. Luke stood beside her. Who are they? Her answer came cold. They are my creators. And my jailers. The enemy ship sent one message. Just one word. Surrender. Kavila didn't reply. Her eyes burned blue now, no softness left. Luke touched her arm. What do they want? She didn't blink. Me. And now, you. Luke clenched his fists. Then we fight. Kavila turned sharply. No. You do not fight. You stay. He stepped forward. I'm not watching you do this alone. But she pressed a hand to his chest. You're not built for this. Your courage is great, but your body, fragile. And I will not lose what I chose. He looked into her glowing eyes. I chose you too, remember. Kavila's hand trembled, but she didn't remove it. Then let me be your wall. The enemy ship began charging a weapon. Kavila stepped toward the viewing window and raised both hands. Her skin glowed brighter, white and blue pulses running through her veins. She looked less like a person now, and more like light wearing a shape. Luke watched, breathless. What are you doing? Calling my true form, she said softly. I never used it before, because I didn't have anything to protect. Suddenly, her body floated inches off the ground. The ship around her responded, walls vibrating, lights bending toward her. Then, silence. Outside, the enemy ship fired. A single beam. Sharp. Fast. Deadly. But Kavila didn't flinch. She raised her hand, and the beam stopped, held mid-space like it had hit a wall of air. The beam twisted, folded, then turned into dust. Kavila's glow dimmed as she dropped back to the floor. She stumbled. Luke caught her. That was insane. That was impossible. She smiled weakly. That was love. Suddenly, a new sound filled the ship. The enemy had sent smaller drones, hundreds, swarming, tearing through shields, trying to get to the core, trying to reach him. Kavila stood again, even weaker now. Her voice dropped to a whisper. They want to destroy the link between us, because it makes me unpredictable. Free. Luke stepped in front of her this time. Then let them try. The ship shook. A wall cracked. Smoke filled the hallway. They both ran. To the core room. To the ship's heart. Where the bond was stored. Where the light from her memory mixed with his humanity. The last thing they couldn't take. Kavila placed her hands on the core. It pulsed. Once. Then again. Then. It expanded. A wave of energy rushed out in every direction. The enemy drones hit the wave. And stopped. Froze. Dropped. Every last one. Gone. Silence returned. The enemy ship faded from view. Damaged. Retreating. Defeated. Kavila collapsed. Luke caught her in his arms again. She was glowing, but fading. Kavila. No, no, stay with me. Her eyes opened weakly. Did I protect you? Luke nodded fast. You saved me. You saved us. She smiled faintly. Then I am yours. She could leave Earth, but she chooses to stay for him. The sky was quiet again. No enemy ships. No warnings. No more red lights. Just stars. Thousands of them. Bright, peaceful, distant. Kavila sat near the ship's window. Her eyes, once glowing with power, now rested softly, calm and gentle. She was healing. Slowly. Luke walked in with 2 mugs of something warm. It wasn't alien food, just Earth coffee. But she accepted it like it was sacred. He sat beside her. They didn't speak right away. They just watched the stars. Together. Then Luke said quietly, You can go back now, can't you? Kavila didn't answer right away. She took a small sip, then nodded once. The path is open. No more tracking signals. No more chasers. I can return and be safe. Luke looked down at his hands. That's good. You deserve peace. She turned toward him. And what about you? He forced a smile. I'll be fine. I've always been alone. Before you, I didn't know there was anything else. Cavella's glow flickered. She reached for his hand. Then let me ask, do you want me to go? Luke's smile faded. He didn't answer, because his heart already had. Cavella leaned closer, her voice lower now. Soft. You gave me shelter. You fixed what I couldn't. And when I broke, you didn't run. Where I come from, no one stays. But you stayed. Luke looked into her silver blue eyes. Because you mattered. She held his hand tighter. Then I want to stay. Not because I must. Because you are my home now. His eyes stung. Not from pain. From truth. You sure? He whispered. It won't be easy here. People might stare. You'll stand out. Cavella smiled. Let them stare. I've stood alone before, but never by choice. Now, I choose you. The ship glowed softly as if agreeing. It gently landed on Earth again, right behind Luke's farm, where it all began. Where she first crashed. Where everything changed. A few weeks later, the world didn't end. No more attacks. No more signals. The ship stayed hidden under a camo field Reese built for them. Luke went back to fixing fences, planting small crops. Cavella helped. Her hands learned fast. Her heart even faster. One night, she sat on the porch, watching the stars. Luke sat beside her, quiet. She turned to him and whispered, Your world has wind, and birds, and quiet. I like it. He smiled. You're really not leaving. She shook her head. Not unless you do. In the barn, the ship waited. Silent. Ready. But untouched. Because the one who flew it had landed in a better place. The heart of someone who had every reason to walk away. And every reason not to. Because love isn't always a grand moment. Sometimes, it's a girl from the stars planting tomatoes beside a man who once thought he was alone. And sometimes, the strongest promise in the universe is made without a single word. Just two hands, one glow, one choice, to stay. The end.